Hi there, Social Studies 30-1 here again, taking a look today at American democracy, structure of the American government. So whereas the nickname for Canadian democracy was responsible government, I'd like you to make the nickname for American government checks and balances. Uh, this will be a system of checks and balances. It's how they ensure accountability in their brand of government. So there's actually a lot going on in the diagram here. Not every single thing we need to go over, but there are some things that you should know to understand this kind of democracy. It's otherwise known as well as a presidential system. Canada is a parliamentary system. This is a presidential system. So the first thing I point out is that in America, as opposed to Canada, they directly vote for their president. And so if you'll recall the lesson on Canadian democracy, unless you lived in Justin Trudeau's riding, you didn't directly vote for him as the Prime Minister of Canada. You voted for a Liberal MP in your constituency riding. Um, and the winner of the Canadian election, the party that wins will pick a leader and they will form the government. Different in America, you directly vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Joe Biden, whoever the candidates might be. That's one thing that really sets it apart from Canadian democracy. You directly pick your president. As you know, America's elections are very fixed every 4 years. The first Tuesday of the month in November, they will have a federal vote to decide who is going to be the president. So there's actually one coming up this November. It's looking like it's going to be Trump again for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party looks like it's going to be Joe Biden, but little ways to go before we make that final call yet. So this is one election, and this is a separate election. These two do not happen together like they do in Canada. So if you remember, in Canada, we vote for our MPs, and out of that comes the Prime Minister. These are two separate elections. One election for the President, another election for Congress. So their legislature, their Congress, is kind of like our House of Commons. Again, this is a bicameral system, and by that I mean that there is an upper house to their legislature, the Senate, and a lower house, which is the House of Representatives. And so you probably watched a movie where they refer to an American senator. That's this portion right here. American senators get elected to 6-year terms of office. They have a lot of power. Each state gets 2 senators regardless of their population. So California, huge population, gets 2 senators. North Dakota, small population, gets 2 senators. House of Representatives, they refer to them in movies as congressmen, or I guess a representative too. There's more of them because each state gets a certain number of representatives based on their population. So New York, huge population, gets more representatives than maybe Wyoming, smaller population. These guys only get 2-year terms of office. The representatives only get 2-year terms of office. The Senate gets 6, so there's more power in the Senate. But there are more representatives in Congress than senators. And that is a separate election. Again, big glaring thing you need to notice now. The president does not come out of Congress. It's not like Canada where the prime minister will actually have a seat in the House of Commons. That doesn't happen here. President is not part of the legislature, and so what makes that important is there's no vote of non-confidence because the president did not come from the legislative body. He's not really responsible to it like he is in Canada. So they do not have a vote of non-confidence. You're stuck with your president for 4 years unless you can impeach him. And that's a term we need to talk about here today. Impeachment means you can get rid of a president before his term is up. You have to prove that he did something illegal, something unethical. Uh, and it's hard to do. It's hard to prove it, to come up with the evidence. It's hard to catch them in that act, I guess. It looked for a while like Donald Trump was going to be impeached, but he was able to survive. And what needs to happen for impeachment is that the representatives will make a motion for impeachment. The Senate will approve the impeachment. They'll vote on it. And if they vote in favor of impeachment, the president has to step down from power, and the vice president will take over and lead the country until the end of that 4-year term. So it looked for a while like Donald Trump was in some hot water and could get impeached. And if he had, if Pence would have had to have taken over and led the country, but the Senate didn't vote in favor, and it didn't happen. Another thing we should quickly talk about too is how the president appoints his cabinet. So just as in Canada, he does have a cabinet, sort of an inner circle of power, of close advisors, people that help him run the country. Whereas in Canada, we call the cabinet ministers. In America, they're called secretaries. So there's a Secretary of State, there's a Secretary of Foreign Affairs. It's important to note too that the secretaries, the cabinet, is not part of Congress. So uh, he's appointing members to the cabinet that were never elected by the people. They're quite often just friends, associates, political contacts, and so on. Other thing we should point out is the Supreme Court, the judicial branch of American government. This is a separate entity, and so again, just like in Canada, the Supreme Court interprets the laws. They review laws before they become actual laws, and they decide whether or not they're constitutional or unconstitutional. There can only ever be 9 judges at a time on the American Supreme Court, and that way there's a tiebreaker. So when they vote on things, they can't get a political deadlock. The American president will appoint judges to the Supreme Court. And so, if you were the president, what you would want working in your favor, let's say, for example, right now we've got a Republican president, Donald Trump, what he would want to see. He's a Republican. He'd want to see Congress dominated by Republicans. He'd want more than less Republicans on the Supreme Court. With those things working in his favor, he could pass a lot of policy. I remember back when Barack Obama was president, he had for a while, he was a Democrat, Barack Obama. He had a democratically dominant Congress, but couldn't get a lot passed, especially the health care bill, just because of political deadlock. He couldn't even push it through then. Second last thing I want to talk about that's really important here are the actual checks and balances. And so this is how America gets accountability in its system. On paper, it actually looks like the president's got a lot of power, and he does, but it's not unlimited, unaccountable power. And what I mean by that is that the president can propose any law he wants. Congress has to vote in favor of the law. If Congress votes against the American president by 2/3 or more of a majority vote, the president actually has to drop the law or go back and change the law until Congress will approve the law or budget with 2/3 majority vote or more. So any big decisions, laws, budgets, declarations of war, the president needs congressional approval. And if they don't give it, they have just invoked what is known as veto power. They gave it the thumbs down. They said no by a 2/3 majority vote against the president's proposal. So that makes him actually quite accountable. Um, he needs them to agree with big decisions before he can go ahead with them. As well, the president and Congress can get together and pass any bill they want. The Supreme Court still has to give it the okay themselves. So they've got to check it for being constitutional. If it's not, they'll turn it down. So there are actually a lot of checks and balances working to keep the president accountable in the United States federal government. As well, Congress can propose a law that the president can veto, but Congress can overturn the president's veto with 2/3 majority vote against. So it's not as one-sided as you might think when you're looking at this diagram. And that's how they get accountability. Finally, to confuse you, I think we got to talk about the Electoral College. It doesn't always come up, but it's something that you should know. And again, be wondering to what degree is this the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's how we want to evaluate democracy. Remember how I said you directly vote for the president? Well, it's not as clear cut as that. What you actually vote for are members of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College are people that are voted for and picked by American voters by state. And so actually when you cast your vote, you're voting for a member of the Electoral College who was promised, listen, if you vote for me, I'm going to vote for this guy. And if you vote for this person in the Electoral College, they're going to vote for this guy. So when voters went and voted, they knew that if they voted for Joe Schmo in the Electoral College, that he was going to cast his vote for Donald Trump. And they might have known that if they voted for another guy in the Electoral College, that he was going to cast his vote for Hillary Clinton. So they've promised to vote for one or the other in the presidential election. And that's who Americans vote for as part of the Electoral College. I think it's around just because when when it got its independence back in the late 1700s, rather than letting everyone vote directly for a leader, they let them vote for a panel, a body of experts, of people with political wisdom and experience. And they would pick the president for them, and they just never really got rid of the tradition. It's been a bit scandalous on occasion. Let's look at some maps now. So those are numbers showing you how many members in the Electoral College each state gets. It's based on population. So California is the biggest state. They get 55 members in the Electoral College. Texas gets 34. Florida 27. North Dakota only gets 3 because it's a smaller state. And so what you want to do is there are 538 members in the Electoral College. If you get 270 of those votes, you are the next American president. So you need 270 or more of the 538 votes in the Electoral College to become the next American president. And once you get past that number, that election is over. And something that you should make note of, it's an all or nothing thing. So you either get all of the 55 seats in California or you get none of them. So it's not divvied up in terms of the popular vote. So you would think that if, for example, Hillary Clinton got 51% of the popular vote in California, she should get 51% of the seats. No, no. If she gets the majority of the popular vote compared to her political opponents in a state, they would get all of those seats. California almost always votes Democrat. And so those 55 seats would have gone to Hillary Clinton. Texas always votes Republican. So those 34 seats would have gone to Donald Trump. And some states are known as swing states. So, for example, Florida historically is a swing state. So those 27 votes in the Electoral College can swing between the Democrats and the Republicans depending on the election. Swing states, Ohio, Michigan, and so on, sometimes are called swing states. And, candidates will spend a lot of time campaigning in those swing states to try and get all of those votes because, again, they don't split them. You either get all of the 34 votes in Texas or none of them. They're not going to cut them up. But that is the seat allocation in the Electoral College. Here's the past election in America. Trump is everything that you see in red, so he won all of those Electoral College votes by state, and Clinton is the blue. So again, like I said, Trump typically, Republicans will win Texas and the Bible Belt. Eastern Seaboard can kind of go either way. West Coast usually goes Democrat. And then, things can vary after that. There's Congress. Red's Republican, blues Democrat. And so, like I said, if you were a Democratic president, you would want Congress to be dominated by Democrats too. You can pass more policy. There's Obama's victory over Mitt Romney well, it was a long time ago now. Obama 332 to Romney's 206, making Obama the American president. And you can see in this case, um, Obama won Florida, Western Seaboard again. Here's Obama's. This was a landslide for Barack Obama, 365 to 173 over McCain. A landslide victory for Barack Obama. 2000 election. So George W. Bush winning his first term in office. Very close election. Um, in fact, at one point, they actually announced his opponent, Al Gore, as the next American president. Gore was the Democrat, Bush was the Republican. And it looked, on first count, it looked like Gore had won that election. I mean, look how close these numbers are, 271 to 266 seats in the Electoral College. Gore actually won the popular vote by a percent, less than a percent over George W. Bush. It all came down to Florida. When they first counted Florida, it looked like Gore had won, and then they counted it again, and it looked like Bush had won. There have been reports of scandal and so on. I don't know the facts around that, but a close election and just shows you how you can lose the election even with the popular vote, as you can see in 2000. America is what we call a two-party system. So they have the Republicans and they have the Democrats. Republicans are their right-wing choice, Democrats are their left-wing choice. There is a third party, but it's not overly viable. The Tea Party is not a credible third party that can be a threat to win the presidency. And so by only really having two parties that can really win the election, it allows the Democrats to move a bit further to the left than they might normally be, and the Republicans can move to the right, because remember that most voters are kind of in the middle. And so if they had a viable third party, it might force these two to come a little closer together. Um, but it's not there right now. So Democrats, Republicans in American government. And that should do it for American democracy. Email me, please, if you have questions.